There's been a lot of things happening in F1 recently. News, speculation, where's this person going to go? Who's this person going to sign with? I kind of just want to get it all out in the open as from what we're seeing versus what's been said out there. Now, granted, since we don't work for the company of Formula One or for one of these race teams, we're not going to know exactly what it is, but here's what the kind of overall going thing is. This is Turn 1. I'm Jeremiah.
Thomas.
And we're going to bring you What's What.
You know, everybody's been talking about is Zhou Guanyu going to get his first race win of the career, and I just think it's a little premature to be talking about that. I mean, he's only gotten a top 5 quali once in his career, and so I just don't know.
Logan, we can dive. Hot talks for the podium.
we can dive into Zhou, right? That's where we want to start.
No, we're not going to talk Zhou probably at all. I do want to talk Newey though, because Newey's been a big headline recently. There was talks about him getting approached by Ferrari, and then I guess what the story is he gave them a number, that number being 150 million, and Ferrari's like, hey man, that's not going to happen. And so now it's kind of like, where's Newey going to end up? Is he going to end up on a backmarker team, middle of the pack? Is he going to find another top team? That's kind of where I want to start.
So if you're not familiar, I mean, if you're somebody close to F1, of course, you know the name Adrian Newey, longtime Red Bull, design guru that designed every winning car for them ever. He's, leaving the company. And so it was up in the air whether he was just going to retire and sail off into the sunset or if he's going to find another landing spot. And I think with all the rumor talk building up, it definitely seems like he's going for another landing spot in Formula One, just wants a new challenge. Like Jeremiah mentioned, Ferrari was kind of top of mind for a lot of people because Ferrari's mixing stuff up. They're trying to get back to a championship level contender. But I have a quote from this article. It says, sources close to Ferrari have told BBC Sport that the CEO at Ferrari has balked at the level of salary Newey commands, and they're concerned that Newey would have too much power and could override the system inside the company. They believe that Newey is currently actively discussing working with Aston Martin. They say that they're probably the leader in the clubhouse, if you will.
So what you're saying is Ferrari, the race team with the most money on the entire grid, refuses to pay somebody that would almost guarantee them wins going forward for God knows how long.
You know what it sounds an awful lot like? The Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, man.
Because they don't want to give the guy that they know can win control because it's too much power, even though they have the money. Right? Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, I hear you.
And we won't dive down the football rabbit hole, but if you know what I'm talking about, you're banging your dashboard right now going, yeah, he's right.
So Newey's interesting because there was talks of him, you said right now with Aston Martin, since the whole Ferrari thing didn't happen. But we also you saw an article the other day, and we talked about it a little bit last night, that said that he had bought a house where?
He was looking at houses in Oxfordshire, UK, which is northwest of London. The only two teams based in that area in the UK are Alpine and Williams. What does that mean exactly? I don't know, because these guys travel so much. Does it really matter where their house is? Probably not. But
I'm not going to read into the whole Alpine thing unless Ryan Reynolds is just looking to put out some serious scratch. But what I do want to bring up is how insane of a move it would be for him to go back to Williams. And I have to say back to Williams because he was there in the 90s. And not only was he there in the 90s, he was responsible for their wins in the 90s. I mean, he was the guy behind Nigel Mansell winning, Alan Prost winning at Williams, Damon Hill, Jacques Villeneuve, Mika Hakkinen. Mika Hakkinen was when he went to McLaren. I'm sorry. But when he was at Williams, they were winning constructors championships and drivers championships. So not only would it be a return kind of to a home base, because that's also where he won his first championships, but think about the storyline here. You go to Williams, a team that is struggling at best on a good day, and take them maybe not necessarily back to a top team because they don't have the resources. But imagine if you're able to take what they do have with their facilities and the amount of money that they can produce and take them at least to a middle of the pack, if not better than, like, let's say an Alpine or Aston Martin. So now you'll have the hierarchy of Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Mercedes, but then Williams. And then maybe years after that, they get some more financial backing. They're able to upgrade their facilities, and they can take them to a top team within a span of, let's say, I don't know, 8-10 years, something like that.
It would be great. It would be like you or I taking over Williams in the F1 video game, which is, it's a usual go-to for us because they're down there at the bottom. And we like the Williams story. I mean, they're one of the most historic teams in Formula One, right? But I mean, right there with Ferrari and McLaren. Here's where I struggle with the notion that Newey is going to Williams. If Ferrari is not willing and or somehow able to put up the dough for him, there's no way Williams is. So if it's a Williams move, it's solely for the love of the game. It's just because he wants that, the situation at Williams, he wants to be the guy to fix it and bring them back to glory because he's not getting a record-setting paycheck from Williams. There's no way.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, wouldn't you take a pay cut if it meant essentially going home to where it all started?
Depends, because who else is knocking? And if who else is knocking is Aston Martin, we have seen in the 2 or 3 years that Lawrence Stroll has really, upped the ante at Aston, everything is a blank check, and he is willing to do whatever it takes. He brings in Fernando Alonso. He hires some of the best staff from around Formula One, stealing people from Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari. They build the best facility in Formula One, outpacing the Red Bull and Mercedes facilities, probably combined. They can give him whatever he wants.
Question. Fernando Alonso is signed until 2026. Let's say they bring in Adrian Newey.
They put him in the driver's seat for Fernando Alonso? That's a wild move. That is crazy, man.
Let's say they bring in Adrian Newey as the technical director, whatever you want to call it, for Aston Martin. And he works immediately on the 2026 car because 2025 is a kind of a wash because they're going to roll with what they have. Let's say they bring in this guy to work on the 2026 car. And remember, they took a lot of people from Red Bull's design department. Adrian Newey would be back with them, and they're the team that built all of the successful Red Bulls. So 2025 is a wash. They start working on the 2026 car for the rest of the 2024 season and 25 season. Let's say they bring out something that just pops in 2026. Does Fernando Alonso actually retire at the end of 26, or does he resign again?
He would be 44
and
45
and cooking.
I think they go maybe depends. We'll have to see how next year goes for Fernando. I would lean more the young up and comer route. Maybe they have somebody in mind now where they sign whoever's dominant at the time, maybe a Lando or an Oscar.
Gotcha. So they get rid of Lance Stroll, bring in Lando.
No, unfortunately, Lance Stroll is going to be there. Lance is going to be there forever, unfortunately. So you got to rely on the other guy. Unless we go back to what we talked about a few months ago, Lawrence just buys Alfa Romeo and puts Lance over there.
You know what? I want to actually win in the sport of Formula One. So we bought Sauber. We're going to throw you in their team, and I'm going to take Aston Martin to the top.
You go have fun over there at stake.
Peter around until your heart's complete.
I don't know. I'm going to bet right now on Aston just because that's where I'm seeing the most. But we could be surprised. I would be surprised by a Williams move. But
I'd like to see a Williams move.
It'd be the best story. I'll throw your own next topic at you, which is let's dive into who do we think is going to have the fastest car at the end of this year. The reference here is looking back at 2023. We're hitting the halfway point in 2024, reflecting on 2023 a little bit. McLaren pumped out a winning car at the end of 2023 that you could say was close, if not on level with Red Bull. Is there a team that is not only going to pull that off this year, but straight up surpass Max Verstappen's Red Bull?
Here's where I struggle, because as much as I want to count out Ferrari in this conversation, I don't think you can ever count out Ferrari, because they do have all that money and they have been making moves to bring together a team that could compete at the highest level with the best guys. So essentially the upgrades that could come for the Ferrari team could put them back in the conversation, but I want to be more realistic in what we do see actually happening, and that's Mercedes bringing in upgrades to take them back up to the top. I mean, we saw George Russell win a race. Granted, that's because Lando and Max crashed out, but who was right there to pick up the pieces? George Russell and Mercedes. Now let's talk about the other guys. McLaren, they have been so good at bringing upgrades. I mean, 2023, we saw them go from arguably the worst car on the grid to knocking on the door of Red Bull. And now this year, same thing. They started out maybe a little bit behind where they should have been, not necessarily the back of the grid, but maybe the fourth best car. And now they're sitting here going toe to toe with Max Verstappen and Red Bull every single race. So it's tough, man. Of course I want to give it to Red Bull just because they've had the best car for years and years and years, but we're starting to see a turning point, and the turning point is really where we need to make a decision on what car we see making the best upgrades, not necessarily what car is the best right now. Red Bull has the best car right now, but if we're following trends, McLaren and Mercedes are going to be right there at the end of the season.
Right now, I give, the advantage to McLaren just because we saw them do this last year. We're seeing them do this again. Of course, we've seen Lando get a win. Oscar's up there pretty consistently. The case for Ferrari, like you were trying to make, I think this week in Hungary is going to be very, very telling because they're changing their floor design, but they're not rolling out a new floor. I'll try to explain this as best as I can. Back in the Spanish Grand Prix a few weeks ago, Ferrari did their first major upgrade package of the year, and it hasn't gone great. They've had mixed results, right? It is what it is. They said that the biggest issue they had was with the floor, and so now they are combining the best elements of their new floor and the old floor that they had before that they really, really liked. Maybe that's the difference. Maybe they just have a floor problem at Ferrari, and maybe that now propels them over McLaren, that simple little fix.
Here's where it gets sketchy, right? Because the floor that they had at Ferrari was fast. I mean, they had a fast car, but what was the main problem at Ferrari?
Porpoising.
Huh?
Oh.
Everybody had a porpoising problem. Tire degradation is where I was going with this. I mean, Ferrari would be the first top team to pit for sure, maybe even the first team to pit besides like a Haas. With them coming back to a design that they liked in the past, it might bring back some pace that they have kind of been lacking in. But what will this look like in the conversation of tire degradation? Right now, they have it figured out. They have it figured out to where they can go forever. I mean, we've seen Charles Leclerc go forever. But yeah, they're not really impressive in the pace department. So let's say they bring back some pace. Will it hinder them in the tire degradation section, or will they have all best of both worlds in that case?
Maybe that's part of the hybrid design between the two designs. Keep the pace elements of the first floor they had this season, and keep the tire deg components of the second floor they had this year.
If they do, it'd be exciting. I think I'd still lean towards McLaren just because their pace of improvement is a lot better than any other team that I've seen in the past 2 seasons.
I mean, right now it's Ferrari's to lose. Ferrari's in the lead. We've talked for probably the past how many weeks ago was Miami? 6 races ago, 5 races ago?
4 or 5, somewhere in there.
We've talked about McLaren since then, like they're in the number 2 seat, and they're not yet. They have not overtaken Ferrari. Now they're close, 7 points. That could be, a sprint weekend that you surpass them. But Ferrari's still in the driver's seat for that number 2 spot, and Ferrari's still the closest team to Red Bull. So if they get it figured out, if we see them go through Hungary, we see them get through the summer break and then come back and be a consistent podium finisher, at least one of the drivers, the debate is going to linger for the remainder of the season, and maybe we don't have that clarity. Now, if McLaren comes out and they're the team getting 1 or 2 people on the podium every week with Max, maybe with Lewis, maybe with one Ferrari sneaking in, I think McLaren runs away with it, and I think McLaren might close the gap to Red Bull. I still think Red Bull's going to win the Constructors. Max, of course, is winning a lot. Checo is getting points, whether it be 1, 2, 4, 6. But come the end of the season, man, I think we might be saying that McLaren built a better car than Red Bull.
One thing we haven't really thrown into consideration here, what if McLaren already has the best car on the grid? Hear me out. Throw Max in the McLaren and throw Lando in the Red Bull. Is McLaren winning these races outright instead of Red Bull?
I think it goes back to the old, very track dependent. What is a car better suited for? We saw Red Bull heavily struggle in Miami. We saw Red Bull struggle last week with Lewis winning in the cold at Silverstone. I think if you have a very neutral environment, like where they do their testing out in Spain, or if you're going to go with Bahrain, which is the first week baseline for every year, I think Red Bull's the better car. And if you put Lando in that, he's winning in the Red Bull and Max is losing in the McLaren. I don't know. It's
interesting.
It's almost too hypothetical to even go down the rabbit hole.
We haven't even really brought Mercedes into this conversation, but the fact of the matter is George has won a race this year, Lewis has won a race this year, and they're looking good. I mean, the improvements that they've brought has arguably put them above Ferrari in the conversation. So right now, if you were to ask me who has the fastest car in order for top 5, I would say, or 4, I would say Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, then Ferrari. So,
wow.
I mean, we've seen some great developments for Mercedes. They've brought some great upgrades, and they have brought their pace back to put them in a conversation for podium spots. So it's tough for me to put them out of this whole argument of who's going to have the better car at the end of the season when we still have half a season left to go. If we're going specifically off of trends, I'm going to give it to McLaren, but I'm also not going to cut out my Mercedes team. I do love them, and they've been making some great progress.
I would stick Mercedes still in the 4 spot. I think it's been very hit or miss with them, and they're gaining on Checo in the standings.
Gosh.
But they're not yet gaining on the McLarens or Ferraris. I mean, they're close. Everybody's close, but it's not. There's a bigger gap. I think I would go Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes. But man, that 3 and 4, especially with Ferrari and Mercedes, are almost interchangeable. And you could also argue that Ferrari and McLaren are interchangeable. So if you're making that logic, then Mercedes is interchangeable with McLaren. Okay. Did you want to talk a little more about McLaren, Red Bull, maybe a little engine talk?
I've heard some rumors. It's been weird. Supposedly, McLaren has been in conversation with Red Bull to get a little piece of that Red Bull power transaction. And rightfully so. I mean, they've been the best engine since the change. But if I had to say if that's really what they need, I don't even know if that's the case, because McLaren is using the Mercedes engine, and the Mercedes engine has proven to actually be pretty decent. I mean, McLaren clearly has built a better car to go around the engine, and we kind of have a Renault Red Bull situation here, where Red Bull built a better car around that Renault engine than the Renault Wirtz team did. And so, I don't know, maybe they do pick up Red Bull powertrains and it's a better fit for them, and they finally unlock that last piece, and we finally figure out, oh, McLaren built a better car, but Red Bull had the better engine. And now with the same engine, it's clear to see that McLaren does have the better car. Here's where it gets funny, though. There has been zero talks about this that I have been able to find since this mention of McLaren looking for new engine providers. The only thing McLaren and Red Bull related that I've been able to come up with is Christian Horner. He accused them of having a car that was illegal, something about an extra cooling vent or something like that they would cover with tape, which is just hilarious, because imagine somebody comes to you and they're like, hey, we want to use your services for an engine. And you're like, you're a cheater.
Hey, we want to give you $100 million a year.
No, you're a cheater.
You know, I'm not going to say I love Christian Horner, but I do like him and respect him as a team principal. I think him and Toto are still the 2 top guys in Formula One. But sometimes, man, don't say anything. Just, if you don't want to provide them engines, that's one thing. Say, hey, no, we don't really, we didn't make Red Bull powertrains to be a supplier. We made them for us. That's fine. Understandable. Don't start calling people out, because then people are going to start looking at you, man. You're going to start getting randomly inspected after races now. Remember back when we had the pink Mercedes that people kept calling for inspections on?
Here's another little funny tidbit. It kind of goes along with the Red Bull car and Adrian Newey. I saw a joke. Obviously, it's not the case, but it's kind of interesting. It's pretty funny. Somebody said that the reason why McLaren and Mercedes and Ferrari are now bringing the fight so close to Red Bull ever since Adrian Newey stepped back. Right when he did, he just took a piece off the car. He's like, now that I'm a spectator, I want to see some action. So I'm just going to... Nobody knows. I mean, Adrian Newey is the only guy that actually knows that car through and through, every single piece, every nook and cranny. So people are saying, what if he just took a piece off the car? Just, I don't know. Let's make it more interesting.
The one screw that controls all the aerodynamics. Yeah. He just got it in his pocket in the paddock.
He's like, I want to see some racing. Let's just take this here and we'll take it off.
Which one of these teams really wants me?
I give you the power of the screw.
Speaking of partnerships, this is something that is not fully agreed to yet, but it looks very promising, and it's 95% of the way there. We talk about these technical partnerships. One of the most known ones in the sport, of course, is Haas buys their engines from Ferrari, but Haas has not built a car around the Ferrari engine that can outpace Ferrari ever. We've seen that, but that does not mean that they are only limited to working with Ferrari. Many teams will have both an engine provider, they'll have their works team, which, their factory team, which builds the car components, and then they'll have a couple of technical partners. You saw this a couple of years ago when Red Bull was the team that would design and build the car. They got their engines from Renault, and they had Aston Martin as a technical partner before Aston Martin was a full-fledged Formula One team.
Even if you looked back at Sauber when they were Alfa Romeo, they bought their engines from Ferrari, but their technical partner was Alfa Romeo.
Right. So Haas is making moves to try to get more out of what they have. Haas has a lot of potential. They're the only American-based team, even though they do a lot of their stuff over in the UK. They have a Ferrari engine, which is fast. Ferrari always makes a fast engine. Reliability is questionable, but speed is not. So Haas is in talks with Toyota to do a Haas-Toyota technical partnership. The main thing that Io Komatsu is looking to do over at Haas is to get full use of Toyota's European facilities. Toyota has multiple facilities, mainly over there in Cologne. They have a full F1 facility. They have the Toyota Gazoo racing facility. They have facilities and people that Haas could use that they do not currently get from either their own facilities or Ferrari. With any sport, the more resources you have, the better. That's why Aston Martin just cranked out a brand new facility. That's why Red Bull and Mercedes have and McLaren have really high-end facilities. That's why all these teams have technical partnerships. Haas didn't have a technical partner. It was Haas and Ferrari. This Toyota deal, if this happens, could be setting them up for those 2026 regulation changes really well.
This one's interesting to me because Toyota's been a player in Formula One in the past. Not so much recently, but in the early 2000s, we saw them as an actual works team where they were out there. And so they have the facilities, they have the setup. Now, they never won championships, but they were a contender. They got some decent points in those years. So you take a team like Haas that they're doing a restart. They have a completely different team principal. They've working on the actual faculty there and everything. So now you take that and put them in a facility that can actually support them, such as Toyota. We could see some interesting things here. Maybe not necessarily them becoming a top contender, but we could see them more defining in the role of middle of the pack, which is kind of where they're placing themselves right now with what they have currently.
Yeah, Haas has one of the lower, budgets, I would assume, in the F1 slate of teams. They would probably be down there with. They might have the lowest because Williams still gets their legacy checks every year, don't they? Haas might be the lowest budget team on the grid.
I think so. I think they are. I could be wrong.
And so if you factor in a Ferrari engine, which they do have to pay for, but you factor in a Ferrari engine, and then now you get Toyota's facilities with some financial deal. Now, I'm assuming Toyota would have their name slapped on the side of the Haas somewhere, so that's their part of the deal. Toyota. Yeah, but you're getting people, facilities, staff, brain power working on designing and building a car. You're getting more facilities in Europe as well. So as you go through the F1 season, you can leverage different points of interest as the tracks move around and the circuits go from country to country. I think this really is going to show what Haas is made of. You now have a full factory team, you have a good engine provider, and you have a technical partner that is giving you more facilities than most teams have in F1. What are you going to do with it?
It's going to be exciting. Change is always good in the sport. Anytime where one team kind of does the same thing over and over and over again, and they never really seem to get off of where they've been, it's always cool to see them mixing it up in some kind of way.
Let's wrap up with this. We have two drivers that have confusing futures ahead of them. One of them is very known, Carlos Sainz. Carlos is getting, for lack of a better term, kicked out of his Ferrari seat by Lewis coming into the mix. Carlos has had 2 very good seasons in a row. He's won both years, right? He won last year and this year?
Has he won this year?
Maybe
We should
not.
know this.
Charles won in Monaco. I can't remember if Carlos has won. But anyways, Carlos is an elite driver. You would consider him in the top 6, maybe top 5, maybe top 4 of whatever your best drivers are currently in the sport. But he's leaving, and he doesn't have a seat yet. There was a lot of talks early on about Mercedes, but it seems like that door has slammed 3 times now
He
over
won
the
in
past couple of
Australia.
weeks. Okay, he won Australia. It seems like the Mercedes door has closed a number of times, but the conversation keeps coming up, so it's unclear. The real only other landing spots for Carlos were Red Bull, who just re-signed Checo, which was confusing, and we'll get to Checo in a minute, and a midfield team to a back marker. I mean, that's kind of it.
Yeah, his landing spots really at this point is he could. I mean, Mercedes obviously is where he's in communications with right now, and that's what his team's working on. But I don't see that playing through, unfortunately. Possible landing spots that are more realistic is going to be like Alpine partnering Pierre Gasly, Sauber partnering Nico Hulkenberg, Williams partnering probably Alex Albon. But
the Sainz Sargent lineup for 2025.
But the reason why we haven't seen him in serious talks with Alpine or Williams or Sauber is because his team's holding out. He wants to be at a top team, and rightfully so, because he's got the skill and the potential to be there. We've seen him win races this year and last year, like you said. So he has the pace. He has the racecraft to be able to go toe-to-toe with some of these better drivers. And so to see him go to a backmarker team would kind of be a waste of talent, and it'd be sad to see, rightfully so. So the holdout and the conversation is what top team could he go to? Well, we see the talks are with Mercedes right now, but they're probably going to be bringing in some younger talent. I think the conversation is leaning more towards Kimi Antonelli, but that hasn't really been confirmed yet. Obviously, George is going to stay there, so we don't know what exactly is going to happen at Mercedes. But the other talks are with Red Bull, and I'll use this as our kind of segue, because right now Red Bull re-signed Sergio Perez until 2026, I think.
It was a 2-year deal, yeah.
So here's the problem with that. There's rumors out there where the contract has contingencies in play where he can't finish 100 points behind Max. He can't finish like 1 or 2 places behind Max in the driver standings, whatever it is. Anyway, none of that's been confirmed, but it's highly likely. And the reason why is because we know Christian Horner and Red Bull specifically don't like to lose. And we know that they're trying to hold on to, I mean, when they had Sebastian Vettel winning outright and then they lost to Mercedes for all the next coming years, they dug, fought, clawed all the way back up to first with Max Verstappen. And now they're back in the championship fights, and they've been holding on to that spot for 3 years now. We know that they have a history of wanting to win. That's what they do there at Red Bull. So why hold on to an anchor that's stopping your boat from moving forward? We haven't seen Sergio Perez in the top 5, but maybe
3 times this year, 4 times?
3 or 4 times this entire season. And so you have Max, who's going to win, and if he doesn't win, he's going to be in the podium spot somewhere. And then the one-off race where he's top 6 or something like that. So why hold on to this Sergio Perez, who's finishing in 9th, 10th, sometimes out of the points, 7th, 6th, when you have teams like McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari all digging with 2 drivers that are consistently getting good points every single race, week in and week out? So the communication that I've been hearing is with Daniel Ricciardo getting better and better and better down in the Red Bull B team, there's a possibility that if Sergio continues to spiral downward and Daniel Ricciardo continues his climb to previous form, that he may take that Red Bull spot. But the conversation could easily lean towards Carlos Sainz, because it would be a return to home for Carlos Sainz as he came up in the Red Bull system also. Either way, I'm a fan of both moves. I love Carlos Sainz. I love Daniel Ricciardo. And I haven't been a Sergio fan since 2020 when he fought off Lewis Hamilton.
I defended Sergio for a long time, and I thought even going into this year he should have retained his. I thought when they signed him last, which was for the 2023 and now 2024 season, I thought that was the right move. I thought he was still,
and I would agree.
Yeah, he was still prime Checo. Of course, last year he did really, really well. Red Bull had the best season they could possibly have had last year. You couldn't have asked of anything else.
Sergio
This
had
year,
wins.
this year though, I'm really struggling to defend the re-signing unless those rumors that you've heard are right. I've seen them as well, where it's the caveats or the little points in the contract that can get them out of it, the clauses, if you will. I'm sure every contract has something like that, unless you're Max Verstappen, unless you're Lewis Hamilton, then you can say whatever you want in a contract. But I'm sure they put something in there that gets them an out. I don't know if it's stay within 100 points. I don't know if it's finish in the top 2 or 3 of the driver standings. There's something in that contract that can get them out, though, because they had to know that top drivers are going to become available over the next 2 years. You're Red
Right.
Bull. You think these things. And if it's not Carlos, it's some young up and comer that you've got in your academy, or somebody that you're going to put at AlphaTauri, like
Liam Lawson.
somebody. Liam Lawson. You could have stolen Ollie Behrman before Ferrari and Haas did. Like there was options out there. So I struggle to think that they don't have anything that gets them out of contract. Maybe Checo goes on a run the second half of the year and puts all doubts to bed. I'm not seeing it because of what we talked about earlier, which is the McLaren, Mercedes, and Ferrari performance just upping their game every single race weekend. And we see Checo staying as is, right? Like he's not getting worse, really. I just don't think he's improving, whereas everybody else is improving. I think that's the difference.
No, and a big problem with it is that last year Checo finished second in the driver standings, and he was winning. He won what, 2 races, 2 or 3? I think it was 2.
He won the few that Max didn't win, besides Carlos's win.
Yeah, and if he didn't win, then he got second place, and then he had a little spiral there where he was getting 5th and 4th and 6th, and then would go back up to second place and all this. Checo right now is 6th in the driver standings. Not sure if you're aware of that. He's behind Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri. He's behind the second-year McLaren kid.
And he's only 7 and 8 points ahead of the Mercedes.
It's a problem, man. It's a problem because last year I could have saw them re-signing Checo just because of the fact that he finished second in the driver standings. But with him being 6th right now, that is an issue, and it needs to be resolved because it's only holding Red Bull back.
I'll close my thoughts with this. I want Carlos in that seat. I don't want Carlos going to Mercedes. I think it would be a good move for, honestly, either team. Of course, it's Carlos, but if you're Mercedes, you do have an up-and-comer that you want in your Mercedes seat. Antonelli could be that guy for 25. Use that as a testing ground for Antonelli, or a getting comfortable with Formula One, the speed, the pace, the car, because 2026 everything changes, and he's right on the same level as everybody else. He's got a year of experience in the car, and he's going into a new regulation where every other driver is as well, regardless of how long you've been in the sport. Red Bull has Liam Lawson, but I would take Carlos Sainz for at least 1 or 2 years and put Liam Lawson in the Alpha seat.
All right, you ready for me?
Yep.
Put Liam in the Red Bull B team.
Okay.
Put Daniel Ricciardo in the Red Bull A team.
Okay.
Put Carlos Sainz at Mercedes and give Kimi Antonelli Logan Sargent's seat. George Russell had to do it. Valtteri Bottas had to do it. Put him in the Williams system and feed him up to Mercedes, just like Bottas, just like George Russell.
So that's I gave the path for if Red Bull wants to sign Carlos, which is Lawson to AlphaTauri and Sainz directly into Checo's seat. I don't really care where Checo goes after that. He probably retires. You gave the path for Mercedes getting Sainz, which is Ricciardo goes to Red Bull. We still have Checo getting kicked out in this situation.
Yes, he needs to go. I think we're in agreement.
So you have Ricciardo going to Red Bull, Lawson still going to Alpha, Antonelli going to Williams, and Carlos.
Excuse me, sir. That's Visa Cash App Racing Bulls to you?
Oh, man. Have I been calling them AlphaTauri this whole time? Why didn't you correct me?
You've only said it twice.
Man, and you know what? In my head, I was like, why do I feel like AlphaTauri is outdated? But I was like, no, it's not Toro Rosso. Look, man, we've been fully ingrained now in the sport of Formula One, where old names are now stuck in my head permanently as their team names.
You're going to start calling them Minardi.
when does Barr get into the mix here?
Oh man. No, so we have like you said, there's two different paths here. Either one sees Checo going, and I hate to say it, but I think that's the move. You can't have one driver winning the drivers' championship and the other driver coming in sixth because he's not consistently getting second, third, or even fourth.
I mean, we see this with McLaren has the 2 and 5 driver. Ferrari is 3 and 4. So that, those teams check out. You have your drivers as close to each other as you can without being, they're split, but they're close. And then Mercedes is right now 7 and 8. Aston Martin is 9 and 10. RB is 12 and 13. That's how it's supposed to be.
Right.
You have your car wherever it stacks up in the rankings of drivers, and then you have one driver slightly better than the other.
I mean, if we're putting Sergio Perez in the conversation of he is to Max what Valtteri was to Lewis, Valtteri was coming in second in the drivers' championship.
Yeah,
so
Valtteri was good. And he did it. He didn't do it for 2 years like Checo did, or maybe 2.5 years. He did it for like 6 seasons.
Yeah,
playing the sidekick role to Lewis, and it worked as Mercedes won 7 or 8 championships in a row.
Even Nico Rosberg was coming in second when Lewis was winning his championships.
I don't know. All right, let us know in the comments, what is your breaking Formula One news that we should know about?
Guys, if you think we're wrong on who gets these Red Bull Mercedes seats and Mercedes signs Yuki Tsunoda, that'd be a wild move, but it'd be cool.
Would it be? We'll see ya.
Bye, guys.